I'm a bag maker, and I don't particularly like bags. It's not my thing. I own a shop. I hate shopping. It's just really funny. Now I'm doing a podcast. I don't listen to podcasts. It's just not my thing.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. There are certain types of businesses that your parents told you not to go into, not to get a degree in, not to try your hand at. Just don't, they said. I experienced this in college. I was a full-on hippie, loved the Grateful Dead, wore dirty overalls with colorful fabric sewn into the legs, and I was great at weaving hemp plant hangers. I'd hang a round metal ring from the ceiling in my college apartment and string about 30 strands of hemp down from it. Then I'd start making knots, joining one piece to another and slowly building a decorative plant hanger. I'd make one, pass it on to a friend, relative, or stranger, and then start a new one. I was the best hemp plant hanger maker I knew. So naturally, I decided to get a college degree in weaving. I loved it, but my dad, he was not so into the idea. Ultimately, he talked me into a degree as an art teacher. He said, just don't. And I listened. But there are thousands of people who are stronger than me, who don't listen. And for them, the path simply isn't easy. Deciding to be an artist is kind of like being Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. You're standing in the safety of the huge ice wall protecting you from the White Walkers, and yet you say, open the gate, let me at 'em. For the good of humanity, I will be an artist. I will create, I will make my statement to the world, and hopefully, if everything goes perfectly, I'll be able to succeed and maybe make a few bucks. Our guest today is such a hero. Armored with her handcrafted leather notebooks, she ventured out and decided to make a living as an artist. But as so many heroes do, she experienced perils, hardships, and moments of doubt. Ultimately, though, she built a collaborative community of artists who all sell their work in her store. Talia Halliday, owner of Gather, a retail art store in downtown Bloomington, Indiana, is the Jon Snow of our town. The leader who has rallied every artist together in an epic battle of art versus evil. Talia set down her sword to take a quick moment and tell her story on this episode of Scratch. We're glad you joined us. So let's kind of take a step back and just talk about, kind of what you come from and what made you into the human being that you are today. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what you were like as a kid?
Sure. So I'm originally from Marion, Indiana, which is about 2.5, 3 hours north of here. Very small town. It's not something I generally admit to a lot of people, but, we can't all be from Bloomington. Both my parents were self-made entrepreneurs. They both own their own businesses, still do today. And so I think that has obviously influenced a lot of what I've done in my life. My mom used to always tell me that I would be a great supervisor one day, and I'm really good at telling people what to do. So thanks, Mom. My mom runs a landscaping business, and so I've been surrounded by plants and flowers my whole life, and then my father owns a bar.
Okay,
and
cool.
You can take that for what it is.
So growing up, you're around entrepreneurs, and what did you take, if you kind of look back, maybe you didn't even realize it then, but what are you absorbing from two very different kinds of businesses that you're watching?
I think really what I took from that is this notion of control and power and having control over your own future, and being able to only answer to yourself to a certain extent and the community at large. So it's always been difficult for me to work for other people because of that, because I'm not in control, I guess. And so I've just never been able to work for other people. So I think I took that, from growing up with entrepreneurs. And I think also what I took from that is community. So my parents didn't necessarily have a huge community of people around them, but my spin on the way they did their business was creating communities of friends and things like that. So, let's say in high school and in junior high, I always had this really tight-knit group of friends that I wouldn't know. don't know if I would call it making businesses with them, but that's what we did, you know.
Yeah.
So you have I don't know if boys have clubs when they're preteens.
Yeah, I think that's a common across genders.
So we had this club called the Preteen Sensations when we were like, 12 and 13 years old. We had this community that we created with these 12 and 13-year-old girls, and rules and regulations and agendas and our own schedules that we would make, because I am a control freak. And then that went on to high school, me being the editor of our literary magazine and having that group of friends. Like, we're a very, very tight-knit group of people. And our literary magazine, what happened with that is our sponsor, because all literary magazines have an English teacher sponsor, as it were, didn't want us to print certain poems,
Like, because they were too racy or something? Or?
Yeah, bad words, or
Okay,
maybe racy. And so, of course, that's when the zine started for us, and we released our own zine that had all the curse words known to man. And now I go back and look at that, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Because, I have my degree in teaching as well. So now, after the fact, I'm like, oh, my teacher sponsor was actually correct. But at the time, it was all about creating these communities and exerting that control, as it were, quote unquote control, over those communities and that great big group of people. And so I think that I've taken, the entrepreneur livelihood from my parents, but then also added to it this notion of a family, in our business. And that's how Gather is. That's how the Handmade Market is. Like, it's all about these groups of people. I can never be a solitary person. I never say that I own Gather. I never say that, oh, this is my store. It is our store. This is what we're doing today. It's always the royal we when it comes to Gather.
Well, and I think it's funny because you started off with this concept of control. And in some ways, like, I totally get it. And in some ways, there's like pros and cons to the concepts of control, right? Then you kind of brought it around to, this whole community. So on that balance of control and community, do you feel like maybe you started in a place of control and have learned to balance it with community, or how has the evolution happened with that?
I think it's both of those things. They balance each other out, thankfully, and I'm a Libra, so I'm all about equity and balance, and so it makes sense. So you have this control, but then you have this control that you want to, sort of mitigate to all these other people and make them be part of this group. That's always really important to me, to make sure that everyone feels like they're part of something. And yes, at the end of the day, maybe I have the final say, but I'm going to be really, really, really influenced by what you have to say, and I want you to know that you make a difference in what we're doing. Well,
and as a business owner, I think if you don't get that, I think control is what comes most natural, because you started it or whatever, so you know that the buck stops with you, so that means you get all the control too. But I think understanding and learning as a business owner that that's actually the complete wrong way to think about it, because once you start thinking that way, you get narrow-minded and become like tunnel vision, and your way is the right way, and actually your clients or your employees or the people around you are the ones who actually know what's going to work or not work, and you usually don't.
Right. I mean, I'm going to give this a metaphor that may or may not be appropriate for your listening audience, but it's the typical dom-sub relationship, right? You have a dominant person, and supposedly they're the one making all the decisions, but the reality is the submissive is letting you be dominant. So yes, I'm the dominant person making all the decisions, but you, as my buying public, as my artist, as my friends, you are the one influencing me and actually telling me what to do. So it's a very
and I think business owners that don't get that don't last.
Yes,
they
completely.
Don't make it,
You have to be able to roll with the punches and adapt, and if you're not adaptable, then you can't make it.
So that sets us up, and that sets really the foundation of who you are as a human being and where you came from.
I don't know if that's very flattering right now, actually.
No, I think it makes total sense. Like, you grew up in these entrepreneur environments, right? And so I think the word control is maybe the negative part of this.
Sure.
But it's just understanding how to run something. And I think being able to see something from the 10,000 foot perspective. And I think that's what I get out of it, is that you saw that from your parents and you knew that you could do that really well. And so you've always tried to put yourself in that position.
Completely.
And that can come off as control. But I think that we're going to get into, as the conversation goes on, the fact that what you've built is something that you are not controlling over whatsoever, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So let's get into the origin story of the Bloomington Handmade Market and Gather, and maybe one feeds into the other in some ways. But so how did all this stuff come about?
So yeah, they all feed into each other. So, you know, it all starts with Conduit Press, which is my leather making business. So it's my arts business. I had a baby 8-9 years ago. I was staying at home and wanted to make some things. It's when Etsy was first sort of up and coming, and so I would list things on Etsy, really stupid things too, but whatever, you know, I listed them.
Tell us a little bit, like what kinds of things?
Yeah, so I started out as a bookbinder. That is what I did. I made books out of all kinds of things. I'd worked at Kinko's the previous 2 years before having Griffin, and so I had all this. They don't recycle things very well at Kinko's, and I'm like pretty environmentally conscious, so I would just take it all home. So I had tons of paper and transparency sheets and just all kinds of paper, basically. So I made books to begin with, and then I was learning to knit, and I love photography, so I was taking photographs and printing those out, and I think I taught myself how to bead, and I was doing jewelry, because that's what you did on Etsy back in the day, is like you were just sort of jack of all trades, do all these things, throw it out there, see what sticks.
So Talia continues to build the Etsy store presence, posting everything she created and seeing what sold. Then she got invited to sell at a new collaborative art fair called the Bloomington Handmade Market. Eventually, she ended up helping to run that event each year. She also realized that artists struggle to reach out to each other. So she started a Facebook group called Bloomington Artist Collective. Talia was doing what she does, taking advantage of opportunities and bringing people together. And then the seed was planted for her brick and mortar shop.
Out of that group, we were sitting at Feast one day for lunch, and one of the makers that was sitting across from me just looked at me, and we were talking about some other art stores around town, and she was just like, you really need to open a store. Like, you need to open a full-time Bloomington Handmade Market. Because at that point, we were only having one Bloomington Handmade Market a year. So where are people buying all of those things the rest of the year? You know, there is a need for them. You know, it's not just Christmas that people, or Hanukkah, that people want to buy gifts for. They have birthdays and Valentine's Day and Mother's Day and graduation and all those things. And I really took what she said to heart and went home and started thinking about it. And I can remember it's when Kinfolk magazine had sort of just started coming out, and I was really obsessed with that whole aesthetic of Kinfolk, which is this very, I don't know, I call it's a very gathering aesthetic, but that only makes sense to me. But it's very much like everyone sit around this community table, you know, this 20-foot long community table, and farm to table and be together. And that was sort of the Kinfolk aesthetic. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I came up, I didn't come up with the idea of a pop-up, but my friend Martha Latta had a pop-up in Indianapolis called Handmade Promenade.
And a pop-up is really...
So a pop-up is just it's a retail store that just pops up for a very short amount of time. And so Martha had been doing it for, I mean, maybe a year, maybe two, in Indianapolis, and she would pop up at events. So like she would pop up at Luna Music in Indianapolis for Record Store Day, or some other things. And I was like, well, that's what we'll do. So I had a new baby, and I was like, I can't open a real store. That's not going to happen. But we'll test the waters and see what happens. And so I plan to have 4 pop-ups over the course of a year. And because I'm a planner, and that's what I do. And that's what we did. And we just got progressively bigger every month. The February show, our pop-up was at an artist's home. We had maybe 7 artists bring all their work in.
That's cool.
And it was mostly an invite only, because it was in someone's home. And then the one in May, we actually hosted at the Green Nursery when they were on Hillside.
Okay, cool.
So it was a very, very large location. I want to say we probably had 20 artists there. We took up a good 20 by 20 foot space in their store. And that was all mom and baby themed, which totally made sense because it's the Green Nursery. And then for student move-in, we did a pop-up at Blue Line when Blue Line used to be located somewhere else. And we took up their whole space. We had about 50 artists in that. It was an ordeal. it was great. We had bands playing out front all day. We had a food truck parked out front. And it was great, but I was just like, this is a lot of work, moving in all these fixtures and all this product. And so then it was on to look for a month-long location. And real estate in this town is not the funnest thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm sure you understand. You guys, moved.
Yeah.
So trying to find a space that would rent to us for only a month.
Yeah. Very hard to do.
It was very difficult to do, and we were lucky to find Fountain Square Mall, which is owned by CFC, which is a local, company. And they believed in us. They rented to us for a month. And we had a little over 100 artists for the month of, from Thanksgiving to December. And that was our pop-up. And that had been the plan to do that for 2 years, to do pop-ups for 2 years. We had such a successful holiday season, that first pop-up. And I never wanted to pack again.
Yeah.
Like, it was just so hard. I decided that when we opened again, it would be for good.
Because you built this thing.
We
you
did,
spent
and
all
it
the
was
time to build it.
Yeah, and it was good. I mean, we were testing the waters, and the waters were tested. Like, Bloomington liked us.
Yeah.
And I really felt like we could stick around. I do things quickly. I make rash decisions. I said I was going to do a podcast, and then I just did it.
Yeah.
But I do think them through. So we like I said, we tested the waters for a whole year. So then in 2014, I guess, I planned for the whole year. I was like, okay, we're going to look for a space. It's going to be permanent. We need to raise money. We did a Kickstarter. I decided to open Labor Day weekend because that's when all the students would come back to Bloomington.
Yeah.
And Labor Day weekend's a big deal here in Bloomington with 4th Street Festival. Once again, I found a space in Fountain Square Mall through CFC. We doubled the size of our space from our pop-up to our permanent store. And then we opened our permanent location Labor Day of 2014 and had about, again, probably 250 artists in the store.
So the whole time, you've been the person pulling together a collaboration. I mean, the bottom line is that's what's happened between 10 artists, between 20 artists, between 50 artists. So that was the origin story. When we come back, we're going to dig a little bit into just the meat and potatoes of what it takes to run a retail store in a Midwestern town with 300 other artists as a part of the process. And we'll talk a little bit about those details.
Great.
We're back with Talia Halliday of Gather, and we're going to talk a little bit about the retail world. I think there's sort of two sides to it. One is this beautiful tribe you've built, and then the other is sort of the realities of retail sales in our current environment. Now, let's start there. What has surprised you about the retail space as you've dug further into it?
That's a good question. It surprised me. I guess what surprised me as most recently is that it's not my thing, right? So I have this wonderful staff. She's my merchandising person, and she has worked in many retail places in Bloomington, amazing retail spaces in Bloomington. She's a native Bloomingtonian. And she's told me before, she's like, you hate working retail. I'm like, oh, I guess I do. And I don't think I realized that until we got to this new space and we have this home. And it's not that I hate working retail, it's that I have to always be moving. And sometimes you're not moving in retail. I just have to always be busy. So if I'm not getting a new maker, I'm meeting a new maker, I'm finding a new thing, I'm reorganizing the way this works, I'm planning a new event, I'm always moving. And so I think that surprised me a lot because the first 3 years in Gather, it was just me. I didn't have staff. That's not a thing that exists for small business people.
Right, yeah, you just do it.
And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I knew every person that walked in the door. I watched babies grow up,
Of course.
And now in this new space, I'm surprised by my lack of wanting to be behind the counter as much. But I think some of that goes toward what you're talking about is creating this tribe. I've created this community of artists, and I feel really confident in what I'm putting out there.
Yeah.
And I feel confident that that we've worked together as a staff, that we've worked together as artists to create this great thing that I can give to Bloomington. And so now I can sort of move on and put my focus somewhere else. And so that surprised me a lot. when it comes to retail?
I think almost like so many entrepreneurs that I talk with, this comes up. And I think it's about entrepreneurs and business owners are folks that like to start things. They like to do things. They like to create systems and create stuff. And I'm hearing that from you too. Like for most of the history of Gather and the Bloomington Handmade Market, you've been creating stuff. And where it can be hard for entrepreneurs is when you get into the place where you've succeeded almost.
Completely.
It's like, okay, we're here. And then the itch starts to come back, and it's like, okay, well, I don't like here. You know,
Right.
I want to know
next?
what's next and where I'm going next. And so many people, I think of Jeff Meese is a great example of someone who loves to create stuff,
yes.
you know, and has created amazing businesses in our town for 40 years. And, you know, I think that it's okay as an entrepreneur to want to create stuff. What's important is to know how to enjoy your success too, and to keep those successes rolling and not, you know, keep them growing. It's like a garden or whatever.
Completely.
Right? Like keep the things that are going, even if you want to start a new garden bed.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I was just thinking about, I've been a little judgmental in the past, I will admit, for some other small business owners that are in our community that I've met. Because we get to that maybe 3 or 4 year mark, and they're like, I'm good, and now I'm going to move on to this next thing. Like I've set that aside, it can run itself, and now I'm going to go do this other thing. And before I got to that point, I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Like, this is your baby. You don't get to just say goodbye. Like, no. And now I'm finally to that point where I'm like, no, I'm good. And it's not that I'm good. Like, I'm not going off to create another business venture. But my focus can now be like what I'm working on right now at the store is really, really curating what's in the store. For the first 3 years of any business, but especially, you know, in arts and retail business, it's sink or swim, you know,
absolutely.
And it was all about, you know, I talked about in the last segment, you know, I have 100 makers, I have 200 makers, now I have 350 makers. Well, now it's time to dial that back. And it's less about quantity and more about quality. And really curating the makers that we have in the store, making sure that it all makes sense aesthetically, making sure that it makes sense in Bloomington for the people that purchase things here in Bloomington, because we are not an online store. People ask me that all the time because we have a lot of tourists that come into the store. And I always tell them they can shop our Facebook, shop our Instagram, send me an email, I'll make anything happen. But we're not an online store. I'm not here to compete with my makers. They sell online. If you want to buy online, you can buy from them, you know, directly.
That's interesting, right, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we're just constantly changing our stock in the store as well. I don't know. There are a few things that you can still find in our store that when we opened 4 years ago that we've had. But I think our times are changing so quickly. The political climate is changing constantly. So we're always changing up the things that we have on our shelves. And I think that's what sets us apart. And ultimately, I hate to say this, makes us successful in the retail world, as well as the arts business world, is always having something new. And I don't want to say trendy. It's not about trends, but it's about knowing what your community will like, and then also knowing what the makers really have their heart set on in making. You know, I don't want to ask a maker to make something that he made 3 years ago that's just no longer his passion, even though it sold really well. That's silly. Right. Let's see what you're working on now. And maybe that's not going to sell as well, but I'm going to move you, I'm going to challenge you as an artist to keep creating something that is going to be well received.
So it's like how to tell a story. You see the storefront as a story, and it's a changing story. And so many storefronts are not that. You know, maybe they're a story. You know, maybe they have a story there, but it's the same story over the course of time, and it doesn't evolve or change. And that may work for some types of retail.
Completely.
But it seems like for what you're doing, you know, being able to change with the trends and being able to connect with where people are at right now, or just to be able to woo somebody with something new. Like I'll walk into Gather because it's Mother's Day soon or something, and I've been there 100 times. But there's always something new, and that's fascinating to me, and maybe that keeps me coming back.
Exactly.
So it's kind of all those kinds of things.
And I think that's really important to us. I mean, not only are we always just moving things around in general, because maybe you came in for Mother's Day and you only looked at that first table, and now you're going to come in for graduation and you're going to look at that same table, but by God, there's going to be something different on it this time. But really to keep everything fresh and moving, because our artists don't want to continue making the same thing
Right.
either.
Yeah.
That's why you're an artist, because you constantly want to make something new. And so we want to keep changing with that as well.
Are there things that you look at in the store, you put on the shelves, you bring in because you were just awed by it, and they just don't sell, and you just have no idea why not?
No. I should say yes. No, I mean, I just have really good taste, Jeremy. I've been doing this long enough. I mean, like I said, I did craft shows. I did the craft show circuit for 8 years, and I've watched, what people buy for 10 years. And I don't know. It's really funny. Angela, my merchandiser at the store, she always calls me the anti-secret. So evidently there's this book called The Secret. This is a thing.
Yeah.
And she calls me the anti-secret because, like, I'm a bag maker and I don't particularly like bags. It's not my thing. I own a shop. I hate shopping. It's just really funny. Now I'm doing a podcast. I don't listen to podcasts. Like, it's just not my thing. But I do it and I make it work somehow.
So then what do you think that's really interesting to me? Like, why do you attract to these things that you don't necessarily have a non-commercial connection with, or a non-artistic connection with?
I think it gives me a new perspective, I'm coming at it from a different perspective than anyone else would, because most people are so and I'm passionate about what I do, but it's a different kind of passion. You find a bag maker, they're passionate about bags, they have 50 purses in their hall closet, and they're going to come at making a bag a very different way than the way I come at making a bag. And I think there are negatives and positives to that, for
totally.
sure.
Yeah.
Like, a negative is that I don't put any pockets in my bags because,
Yeah.
But, and perhaps if you were a collector of bags, you might do that.
Yeah.
And maybe it takes me a little bit longer to get somewhere because I don't carry a lot of bags. I don't know which side to put the zipper on because I don't do that.
Right.
And same thing with retail. I don't like to shop. I hate malls.
Yeah.
I hate them. I unfortunately do most of my shopping online. But if I ever want, like, a gift, I will go to a store like ours that's independently owned and that's carrying things that you can't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I'll do that, but I go in, I know exactly what I want, and I walk out.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I'm good at what I do, because I'm that shopper. Like, I don't want to be distracted by all the fanfare and foo-for-all.
You're not there to be wooed, or you are there to be wooed. It's like I want it right. It better be there, and it better be what I want. And you're setting your space up in that same way.
Exactly.
And that makes total sense.
Yeah. So I don't generally buy things that I know won't sell. And I mean, sure, I guess there's an occasional thing, but not really. Not really.
So you must have artists come in the door. I've been an artist before and approached folks like you, and so you must have artists come in the door or try and connect with you all the time. Like, how do you know what works, and how do you say no?
Oh, I don't know how to say no. I'm awful at saying no. I have a policy that you cannot come into my store and bring your artwork, because that's how bad I am at saying no. And so I make it very clear on our website, on our Facebook, and the girls that work the store know that, don't bring it in. I have people apply, and I always say, this is sort of my mantra, just because it's not for right now doesn't mean it couldn't be for later. So I never send rejections out for the store, because that thing that you make right now, let's say you make knitted cowls. Obviously, I'm not going to take it in the summertime. But, you might change a little bit as an artist. I might change a little bit as a store, and I might be ready for you come fall.
Yeah.
So it's not just this one and done kind of thing. And I think that that's really important for artists to know, too. I know rejection is very hard, but, they'll apply to the store, they'll apply to the show, and they will get rejected from the show because it's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
But apply again, because just because you're not for us right at this moment doesn't mean that you couldn't possibly be for us in the future, because we are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And the things that we sold inside Fountain Square Mall just last year are completely different from what we sell in the store now.
Yeah.
And that's going to be constantly evolving.
And I think for those artists that are trying to, that can get rejected in a scenario like this or feel rejected no matter how, kindly you do it, it's important to understand that we are also being rejected by clients every time someone walks in and chooses to or not to buy things. So as the business owner, you're experiencing rejection on a subtle, not spoken level. Like no one walks back out the front door, Gather, and is like, I thought this sucked. I thought that was terrible. I don't understand why you even have this section of things,
well,
and you didn't have the thing that I was looking for anyway. And if everybody was like that, maybe I don't know, but maybe they are. I don't.
I mean, some people are, but yeah. I mean, rejection's hard for everybody, and I just think that you have to take it as a learning experience and grow from it. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to know a little bit more about who the artists are that work with you in the Gather Shop, and you're going to tell us a couple of stories and then talk a little bit about your podcast and how folks can listen to more of those stories when we come back.
Perfect.
All right, we're back with Talia Halliday of Gather and the Bloomington Handmade Market. And Bloomington Handmade Market still exists, right? Still happens
totally
once a year?
We're up to twice a year because I'm a glutton for punishment. So our holiday show is always the second Saturday in November. It's at the convention center. And then we were doing a spring show for the past 3 years, but now we've moved it to summer and it's outside.
Cool.
So, yeah.
So you work with all these artists, creating in all these different mediums and from all different parts of Indiana, the country, just around?
So yeah, we're primarily focused here in the Midwest, I would say in our tri-state area, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. But what I generally say to customers that walk in the store and want to know where I find my artists is that I really like to brag a little bit on the fact that I would say 80 to 90% of our artists I know personally because I've done craft shows with them, because we're friends, or we just met at an art show or a trade show. So I do have artists from Georgia, from Portland, Oregon, from Philadelphia, sort of random cast-offs
that
I've met. Yeah.
So tell us the story of a couple of folks. Like, what is an artist who's in your shop? What do they create? What's their story?
Perfect. Well, let's see. We could start with Jim from Bad Knees Tees. He's been selling with us, since the beginning, I would say. Funny story about Jim is that we lived in Collins around the same time. So we both went to IU, and I knew Jim and his wife Amy from back in the day. So there's still that community that's coming up because Collins is all about community. You weren't a Collins kid, were you?
No, but it's a dorm at IU in Bloomington and kind of has a reputation for being very artsy, and so a lot of folks attract to that space. And just like lots of college communities, a lot of times can make lifelong friends and people that really continue to follow each other's worlds and be a part of each other's spaces. But Collins is one of the coolest dorms at IU.
It is. It's beautiful. It looks like a castle. But yeah, anyway, so we weren't necessarily friends in school, but when I started seeing Jim and Amy, I was like, man, they look really familiar. And then I realized that we must have lived in Collins around the same amount of time. And so, Jim's a local guy, lives here in Bloomington with his family, and his wife's a doula. And so we sort of know their whole story and their kids, and they come in the store quite often. And Jim is a full-time school teacher, an English teacher at that. I don't think I mentioned that. So my bachelor's degree is in English, and my master's degree is in English education. So I sort of have a kinship with Jim that he's doing that thing, which I just couldn't do. It takes a very special person, as you know, to be a teacher. And he's a high school English teacher. And his work, he does screen printed t-shirts primarily. He does some tote bags and some buttons and magnets. And they're very, very current. Jim is one of those artists that I have to bother probably more than he would want me to, because we sell a lot of his work and they're very political. And he's doing, he gets a t-shirt out whenever that man says something stupid, it's on a t-shirt within a week. And so he's really good about getting new products out to us like that. And we carry all of his work, and I think it's really symbolic of what we stand for in the store. We don't I think for a very long time, and I don't really want to get into politics, but I'm a pretty apolitical person. But there comes a time in your life that that you can't be that way anymore. And so when I actually had another artist ask me before Jim had started making overly political T-shirts about having some political statements on artwork, and my initial reaction was, nobody wants that in their house.
Right.
I also didn't realize what was happening,
Right.
you know, in the
Yeah.
world. And now that's something that I think people can really come to find at Gather and feel at home there, is that you feel a connection. You feel like, oh, I get these people. And, you know, there was a time, and this goes off of Jim's story, but there was a time when there was no one on the square carrying pride flags anymore because Athena had closed. And when I saw that that was the case, clearly we now carry pride flags and have a pretty large, or will have a pretty large pride section year round, because I think that's really important too, to show where you stand. And I think that's really hard for a retailer, but you need to to show your voice.
I think it is hard for retailer.
Yeah.
I mean, because in a lot of ways you make a connection that is much deeper, obviously, with your ideal client or the folks that connect with that message. But obviously, you also turn people off
Completely.
in that same message. Have people come in and like commented on being turned off by the political stance of the space?
I mean, they're very few and far between, and I'll continue to carry obviously Jim's work and other work that is political, because we agree with those messages. And if we can get the conversation started, you know, at least maybe we made them think a little bit more. Why was this really classy store in downtown Bloomington carrying a shirt that said, you know, then I'm all for it. And I think people should know, and you've got to own. I think we're past the times where people can say, I don't know, hide behind their political beliefs or not be upfront with them. And we just sort of all wear them on our sleeves now, you know, as I show you my Nevertheless She Persisted tattoo, like quite literally on my sleeve. So.
And I think especially if you come back to the retail space, and as hard as retail is in this current environment with online everything else, I mean, to just be safe probably just doesn't work.
No, and I think that's another thing that sets us apart. You know, we're always changing our stock, but yeah, we're offering experiences that no one else can offer. And yes, you come in and you really get to see who we are as people. The products that that I choose very specifically are for a reason, so you know the person that you're buying from. Yeah. And I think that's really important and sets us apart from buying on Amazon, you know, or Uline. You don't know where, you know.
Right.
Like,
so Jim is one of your artists, a high school teacher, full time, and then like on the side he's got bad knees.
Right, like printing in his basement, like printing lots of stuff in his basement too. Like he is not just a weekend, I'm gonna print some t-shirts for fun. Like he moves out the t-shirts and has, I mean, I would say at least 30 designs on any given day, and is always making more. And like I said, prints them in his basement, and then not only sells at our store, but sells at numerous stores like ours, and then sells at shows too. And it's really amazing that he is able to have 4 children, a partner, a full-time job that takes your brain. Not that jobs don't take your brain, but you're like a high school English teacher. Like, come on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think his students are involved in what he does too. Like I think he shares his story with his students, and so they really get it. And I think it's great.
All right, tell us another story. I want to know about somebody else.
So another person that's sort of a little bit different would be Chelsea Jones from Tactile Melody. So she's a jeweler, and she essentially does this art business is her full-time gig. You know, so I think that's a little bit different. Like it supports her as a person. She makes copper and silver jewelry, and then she does work for another jeweler as well, doing some work, and then she also works at Gather. But you know, for the most part, you know, art is her full-time gig. And what I really love about Chelsea's work is that Chelsea's a really good friend of mine, so I know maybe too much about Chelsea, but she loves space and traveling and music, and I can see all of those things in something as, I don't know, as a piece of jewelry. How do you get music into a piece of jewelry? But it just is. Like, it's really fun to know Chelsea loves traveling. You know, she'll go to New York City 2 or 3 times a year, or go to all these concerts, and you can go, oh, that totally makes sense, what she does. And the fact that she's obsessed with outer space, and she has this really, really great line of constellation jewelry that started out with just constellations and is now zodiac, because that's what you do. You make what your customer wants you to make.
Yeah.
But she's so passionate about it, and it's lovely to watch her grow as an artist, as a sort of a fine artist as well. Screen printing and t-shirts is sort of our bread and butter, and that's what we do. But then Chelsea is sort of really rides that line between fine art and craft, and making her jewelry. And my favorite story about her that I just learned the other day recording the podcast with her is, her business name is Tactile Melodies. And I always was curious. It makes sense with her jewelry because her jewelry is very tactile. It's very rough. It's copper and things like that. But then it's also very smooth and just classy and melodical. And the way she made it, she was a student here at IU and sort of lucked into being an art major. That's a whole other thing. But she started making jewelry, and a friend of a friend had asked her to do an art show in Terre Haute, and she was like, oh, okay, I'll do it. But she doesn't do anything half-assed. She had to just go all out, because that's what Chelsea does. And she just threw a bunch of words down on a page that she liked, and Tactile and Melodies were two of those words, and she just sort of randomly put them together, and they so beautifully represent her work. And it's interesting because now I think about it, because that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Did her work come first and influence Tactile Melodies, or did Tactile Melodies, is that continuing to influence her work now? And
now that she set that foundation. And so that's one more artist that has work in your store. And so, this whole conversation, we've been building this story in some ways of this community of people that essentially has created a retail space in a town that has struggled to have successful retail spaces. And so what you're doing right now and what you've accomplished with everyone else is again, something that's awesome and beautiful and amazing. And you've decided to try and tell that story a little bit deeper by creating a podcast.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So, we have, 300 some odd artists in our store, and we often have, what we're able to offer our customers that maybe other stores aren't able to offer are these stories behind each of the individual humans that make the work that we carry. And I really wanted to really tell those stories. When someone comes in the store and says, can you tell me about this bag? I mean, I can, but it's going to take more than the 2 minutes that you're really going to offer me. So let's really dig deep and interview and have conversations with the artists that we have in the store, and let our customers really hear about the history of where their business was made, what influences them, what their origin story is, and where they plan to go from here. And I think that's really, it's just amazing, because I really love, I've done 3 of them now, and I've known these artists for years, but I'm hearing conversations and stories that I hadn't heard before, and it really even lets me see these artists in a new light, and it will train our staff to see these artists in a new light and be able to communicate that with our customers. And I think it's really, really important to share those stories and where people come from, and where people come from and why they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can we find that podcast?
Oh, wonderful. It's called Gather Stories, and I'm new to this podcast world, so we are on iTunes, I believe, and then it's on our blog, just gathershoppe.com. Gather Shoppe is gather and then SHOPPE, because we're British, evidently, .com. You can also find it on Facebook. There'll be links to it.
Okay, cool. And where do you see, sort of last question to sum it up, where do you see Gather 5 years from now?
I see Gather still being where we are physically. I see it being more and more curated, and the level of handcraftedness becoming more somehow, I don't know, because artists are already great, but just becoming more, because we're growing with our artists. All of our artists, they've now been making things for 10 years, and so they're really good at what they do, and we'll continue to change with them, and we'll continue to change with the times. I see the possibility of, I don't want to say this, but I do want to say this, another retail location of some sort, maybe not Gather, but an offshoot of Gather. Let's say maybe there are certain things in the store that sell really well that could have their own place. I see that happening, and just always changing, always new items. And I really want to start focusing a little more on representation. I think representation is really important. So finding younger artists, and I know this is going to sound weird, but male artists. There aren't a lot of males in our store. And then also artists of color, I think, are really important to have. And so I would like to purposefully, mindfully, awarefully, look for those look for those artists and give those people a voice that may not necessarily have a voice right now.
Okay,
So.
cool. So I think you kind of already said it, but if folks want to find Gather in general, how can they do so?
Well, we're located at 116 North Walnut in Bloomington, if you're local, Bloomington, Indiana. We're online at gathershoppe.com, Facebook, Gather Shoppe, Gather, SHOPPE, Instagram, all of the social media places. Yeah.
Cool. Talia, it's been awesome to hear your story from infancy all the way to now and even beyond. And thank you so much for spending a little time telling it on Scratch Entrepreneur.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Special thanks to Talia Halliday for taking the time to share the Gather story with us. This show was produced and edited by me, Jeremy Goodrich. The music is by my high school buddy, Mark Vinton. Mark and I lived together in college before he disappeared for a few years into the music scene of Southern California. When he reemerged, there were lots of stories. Mark spent a decade working for rap artist Lil Jon, and the stories he has to tell, well, they could be a podcast on their own. If you enjoyed this podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. First, subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can hear future episodes as soon as we release them. While you're there, please give the show a review. We'd love to hear what you loved, what you didn't, and what you want to hear next. Until the next time, we truly appreciate you listening.